Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Nicole, and in today's video, I'm sharing with you an 8-step method that will help you to write an essay or an article or a blog post fast. If you have an essay or an article that is due tomorrow and you only have a day or just a night to write it in, then this video is for you. You probably don't have a lot of time, so let's get started. So this is an 8-step method that I developed in high school and college where maybe I had procrastinated over writing a paper, or I had a lot of projects due at the same time and I needed to write my essay quickly. And after college, I've continued to use this 8-step method when working on blog posts and other types of articles. If I have a certain deadline that I need to submit them by or publish them by, and I need to write them quickly because I didn't have a lot of time to work on them. But I also use this 8-step method when I have more time to work on a piece of writing. And I definitely recommend that if you do have more time, that you do devote more time to your piece, because your piece will be so much better. So let's get started with step number 1. The first step is to read the assignment or the formatting guidelines if you're submitting your piece to a website or to a writing contest or something like that. And this might seem like a really obvious step, but it's easy to fall into this trap of thinking, oh, I read that, the guidelines 2 weeks ago, and I know I have to write 500 words or something like that. And then you look at them again and you realize, oh, actually I have to write 1,000. So definitely look at that assignment again, look at those guidelines. If you don't have a writing prompt, then this would be the step where you would think up a topic for your piece. For example, if you're writing a blog post, you might think up your topic here. Or if you're submitting to a website, you might want to look at what other articles have been published there and look at the tone and the style of those pieces so you know the type of piece that you could submit to that publication as well. The second step is to write in your head. So you might be getting a little bit anxious at this point and want to start writing right away, but I really recommend this step that will help you to get away from that blank screen that's intimidating you and that document that you are just looking at that and thinking about all of the words you have to write. And with this strategy, you're going to take a step back and just let your brain think about this paper that you have to write and think through the ideas and get an idea for what how you're going to outline your piece, what your thesis statement is going to be, and all of that. And I actually have a whole video that I made about the writing in your head strategy. I'll put a link to that in the description box below so you can check it out. But basically with this strategy, you're going to find a quiet place, maybe go for a walk, or maybe just sit at your desk, block out all distractions. And that's really important for, when you're writing your paper too. You want to make sure that you don't have any distractions. So, maybe that means turning off social media, going off the grid, finding a shack in the woods, living off the land for the next 24 hours. Not until you finish this YouTube video, but definitely you want to block off all distractions and just spend a little bit of time thinking through, how are you going to begin your paper? Are there any books or other material that you can gather for research? How are you going to outline it? Just start to think about that in your head, but you don't need to start writing yet. So this is just a way to start thinking through your ideas. The third step is to come up with your thesis statement. So this is usually the last sentence of your introduction. And it's a sentence that summarizes what your paper is going to be about, which is really helpful for you so that you stay on topic and you don't run off on tangents. And it's also really helpful for your readers so that they understand where you're going and what the main message of your piece is. So if you're working on an essay for school, your teacher may have given you a thesis formula or example thesis statements that you can use. If you're working on a blog post or a memoir essay or persuasive piece, then your thesis statement is going to look a little bit different. And so I have written an article sharing 5 different thesis formulas that you can check out. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Basically, if you are going to write a blog post, then your thesis might be something like, in this blog post, I'm sharing an 8-step method that will help you to write an essay fast. If you're writing an essay, I really like the formula claim plus reasons equal thesis statement, and you can kind of tweak that to best fit your paper. But what you should keep in mind here is that this is just a working thesis statement, so you can definitely tweak it as you write your paper, and this is just a jumping off point so you have a general idea of what you're going to be arguing for or discussing in your piece. The 4th step is to outline your piece. And I find this is a really critical step when you're working on writing something fast, because it's easy just to want to get words on the page fast. And when that happens, you can often end up just you just start writing and then you get halfway through the paper and you realize I don't have enough support for what I'm arguing for, or maybe I don't even agree with it anymore. And so this prevents that, where you're able to organize your ideas and think about how you can logically present them. So you can use Roman numerals to organize your outline. You can use titles at the beginning of each section to kind of summarize what your thoughts are going to be in that section, and really just use an outline that works for you. I often keep the titles when I am writing a blog post, or I've done this with essays as well, where it tells the reader what each section is going to be about, so they kind of can look over your paper and even see your argument outlined there in your finished piece. Now, another quick note here that, again, these steps are not set in stone. So it really depends on the piece that you're working on and how familiar you are with your topic. So for example, if you were writing an essay about a book that you just read and you are going to come up with your thesis statement and come up with your outline, you probably would be really familiar with the material and know exactly what you wanted to argue. So you could definitely write your thesis statement, you write your outline, and already in your mind you know what quotes you're going to take from the book to support your arguments. But if you are writing a piece about a topic that you're not as familiar with, you might need to do your research first, which is actually, spoiler, the next step after this one. So you have to think about what your piece is, how familiar you are with the topic. You might want to do some research first, then write your outline, then write your thesis statement from that. So it really doesn't matter, and it depends on the piece that you are writing. This is totally flexible. And our 5th step is to research. So this means collecting studies and stories and quotes that you can add to your paper to support your arguments. And it's also a really helpful way to help you to reach your word count goal if you have a certain quota of words that you need to reach for your piece. So if you have a really long quote, look at, what is the most relevant part for my paper, and, what part is the most insightful, and cut out the rest that isn't as relevant to your paper and just include that part that is going to benefit the reader. But definitely including quotes and stories and studies is going to make your paper stronger, and it's going to look like you put more time and effort into your piece. So I definitely recommend spending time on research and gathering these different stories or studies or quotes that will further support your argument. And the 6th step, the one we've all been waiting for, finally we're ready to start writing your paper. So if you are still struggling with a little bit of writer's block, I would recommend, using that writing in your head strategy again, and just looking over your outline and your research and your thesis statement, and so that you're preparing yourself to begin writing. But I think that all of those steps, I find that they really give me a solid foundation where now I'm not coming to a completely blank document to begin writing, but I have this foundation of an outline and a thesis statement and research, and I'm able to begin writing my paper. Here are several tips that will help you to write your paper quickly. The first tip is to look at which part of your paper you're most excited to begin writing. So this means that you don't necessarily have to start with your introduction. You could be really excited for a body paragraph that you've gathered a lot of quotes and research for, and you want to start there. So it's really up to you. And I just find, you don't have to start with your introduction, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion. You can start with, the last body paragraph, or however you want to do it, just so you get that momentum and you start writing. So look for which is the easiest or the most exciting, what part am I most excited for, and begin writing that section. My second tip is to write first, edit later. So at this part, you really just want to be writing your piece and not worrying about any grammar errors or stylistic errors. And if you run into a place where you're struggling with a sentence and it's just not sounding right, then what I recommend doing is just highlighting it in red, and when you reach that editing part that you can come back and edit that part of your piece. But here it's really important to keep that momentum going, and you want to get your first draft finished. My next tip is to use a timed writing strategy like the Pomodoro technique. So this is a strategy where you put a timer on for 25 minutes and then you take a little break and then you come back and you put your timer on again. And it's just a really great way to force yourself to focus and block out all distractions and say, like, now is the time where I'm going to start writing my piece. So I have an article that I wrote all about the timed writing strategy. I'll put a link to that in the description. And there are some ways that I've adapted this strategy. So one thing that I like to do instead of using a timer is I will put on a piece of music. So I might have a favorite movie soundtrack that I know is 50 minutes long, for example, and I put that on and I know that I have to write until the music ends. Or I might give myself a word count goal where I say, okay, I have to write 500 words before I can take a break, or something like that. So those are just little ways that you can sort of give yourself a goal. So maybe it's with a timer or with a soundtrack or a word count. You give yourself a goal and you don't stop writing until you reach that goal. The seventh step is to put your essay aside. And, if you're pressed for time, you might not have a ton of time to put your essay aside. But I really recommend, even if it's only 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you just want to step away from that piece that you've been working on for so long so you can come back to it with a fresh perspective when you're ready to edit your piece. And this will really help with the editing process. And, novelists will often put their manuscript aside after they finish that first manuscript. They'll put it aside for months and then come back. So if you have more time, the more time, the better. But even if you only have, 10 minutes, just put your piece aside for a little while, and then you're going to be able to come back and edit it with a fresh perspective. And now we've reached the eighth and final step. You are ready to edit your piece. So you might be wishing at this point that your computer had an edit button where you could just press it and your paper would be magically edited. Unfortunately, that is not the case. I actually enjoy the editing process, so maybe you do as well. And I have written an article sharing my 7-step method for editing, and I'll share a link to that in the description. So make sure to check out the description because there's lots of great resources there. And in that article, I share some questions that you can ask yourself that will help you to self-edit your piece of writing. There are also great websites like ProWritingAid. This video is not sponsored by ProWritingAid, where you can copy and paste your paper and into their web editor, and they will give you, they'll tell you if there are typos or grammatical errors or stylistic errors, and that is really, really helpful. And I also really recommend, another thing that's really helpful is to read your piece out loud. So that will help you to catch typos and anything else that you don't find when you are just reading your paper silently in your head. And I also recommend, right before you go to publish your piece, or if you're submitting it on a website or handing it in to a teacher or something like that, just give it a final read through, and that will really help, again, so that you can see if you missed anything during your editing process. So that is the 8-step method, and you are now ready to go write your piece. I hope that these steps help you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments if there there's another tip that you have to share for writing a piece fast, or if you have another step to add or something like that, let me know in the comments. Also, be sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos like this one. And I'll also put a link in the description to my email newsletter where you can sign up and get more writing resources. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic week. God bless, and I wish you all the best with your writing projects.